When you think of October 31st, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's Halloween, right? Candy, costumes, spooky stuff. But what if I told you that on that exact same day, hundreds of years ago, a German monk hammered a piece of paper to a church door and, well, changed the entire world? Let's get into the incredible and kind of weird connection between Reformation Day and Halloween. So, how on earth did this happen? It seems so random, doesn't it? You've got ghosts and ghouls on one side, and a protest that would literally reshape Western civilization on the other. But here's the thing, it was no accident. The answer is all about some very, very clever timing.
Okay, so to really understand how this all came together, we've got to jump in our time machine and go way, way back, long before the 1500s. The story of October 31st actually starts with the ancient rhythms of the harvest, a time when the days were getting shorter, the world was growing darker, and people believed the veil between our world and the next was at its absolute thinnest.
Just take a look at this timeline. You can literally see how the meaning of this date was built up over centuries, kind of like layers of paint. It all kicks off with the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain, which was all about celebrating the end of the harvest. Then the Romans show up and mix in their own festivals for the dead, and finally the Christian church comes along and places its own major holiday right on top of it all, creating All Saints' Day on November 1st. And you know, what's totally wild is how many of our modern Halloween traditions come straight from these ancient Celtic beliefs. They thought that on the eve of Samhain, the barrier between our world and the spirit world basically dissolved. So what did they do? They wore costumes to hide from any spirits that might be wandering around, carved scary faces into turnips to ward them off, and even left out treats to appease them. Sound familiar? So here's the crucial piece of the puzzle. The church rebranded October 31st as All Hallows Eve, hallow being an old word for saint. It was the big vigil, the night before the huge church festival of All Saints' Day. This meant that on this specific night, everybody was already thinking about saints, souls, and the afterlife. And that, my friends, created the perfect stage for what was about to happen in 1517. All right, let's fast forward to the early 1500s. The Roman Catholic Church, which was the only church in Western Europe at the time, was facing a bit of a crisis. There was a lot of corruption, and for the average person, there was this deep anxiety about salvation. People were genuinely terrified about what would happen to their souls after they died. And a huge source of that fear was the idea of purgatory. The church taught that this was a place you went after you died, if you weren't bad enough for hell, but you weren't quite pure enough for heaven either. You had to be cleansed of your sins, and that could be a really terrifying process that might last for hundreds or even thousands of years. And this is where indulgences enter the picture. The church basically started selling these certificates, which were essentially get-out-of-purgatory-sooner cards. You could buy one for yourself or even for a loved one who had already died to shorten their time of suffering. This turned into a massive fundraiser, helping to pay for huge projects like the rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And this quote just perfectly captures the problem. It was a catchy little jingle used by an indulgence preacher named Johann Tetzel, and it made salvation sound like a simple cash transaction. Pay your money, and proof your loved one is saved. It's this very practice that deeply, deeply troubled a certain German monk. And of course, that monk was Martin Luther. He was convinced that the church was taking advantage of people's deepest fears and was selling them a false promise. He knew he had to speak out, but he also knew he had to do it in a way that people would actually notice. And so, on October 31st, 1517, Luther makes his big move. He walks up to the door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg, which, you have to understand, basically served as the town's community bulletin board, and he nails a document to it for everyone to read. And that document wasn't just some short complaint. It contained 95, that's right, 95 theses, or points for debate. They were a direct challenge to the sale of indulgences, and they questioned the Pope's authority to free souls from purgatory. Now, at this point, he wasn't trying to break away from the church. He was an insider trying to spark a debate to fix it from within. Which brings us right back to our main question. Out of all 365 days in the year, why did he pick October 31st? Was it just a random Tuesday? Or was there something more to it?
Oh, it was definitely not a coincidence. It was an absolute masterstroke of timing. Luther knew that on All Hallows Eve, the town of Wittenberg would be flooded with pilgrims and church members, all getting ready for the big All Saints' Day festival the next morning. By posting his 95 Theses on that day, he guaranteed his message would get maximum visibility. It was the perfect moment to light a fuse. And from that moment on, the two traditions that shared this date started to drift apart, heading down two very different roads. And that's how we end up with the strange pairing we have today. On one path, you have All Hallows Eve, which over time evolved into the secular, community-focused holiday we know as Halloween. It's all about costumes and candy, and most of us have forgotten its ancient spiritual roots. But on the other path, October 31st became Reformation Day for Protestants, a really important day to remember when the whole movement for religious reform began. Two totally different legacies, sharing the very same spot on the calendar. And you really can't overstate the impact of what Luther started that day. The Reformation was a true game changer. It brought back the idea that salvation comes through faith alone, not by buying it. It led to the Bible being translated into languages that everyday people could actually read. And it challenged the idea that any single human authority had all the answers. In one of his most powerful theses, number 62, Luther laid it all out. He argued that the church's real treasure wasn't some bank of good deeds that could be sold off piece by piece through indulgences. No, he said the true treasure was the gospel itself, the good news of God's grace, which is a gift given freely to everyone. So the next time October 31st rolls around, whether you're carving a pumpkin or just enjoying some candy, maybe take a second to remember the other side of the story. It isn't just a night for tricks and treats, it's also the anniversary of a brilliant, carefully timed act of protest that totally changed the course of history. It really makes you wonder, what other hidden stories are hiding right there on our calendar?